I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. My name is Tim Markle. I am Director of the Southern Regional Center for Children and Youth with Special Health Care Needs. We're out of the University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities at the Weisman Center on the campus of University of Wisconsin-Madison. I am so excited today that we have Leslie Stilson with us from the McBurney Disability Resource Center, also at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I heard Leslie do a presentation on ableism a few months ago, and I don't think I paid good enough attention because it left me wanting more. And so I invited her back, and she graciously has agreed to do a webinar with us. So I will be proceeding with the slides. Leslie, I'm going to go ahead and pin you, and you just take it away.
Excellent. Perfect. Oh, thank you so much, Tim, and thank you all for being here today. As mentioned, my name is Leslie Stilson. I use she, her pronouns, and just a little intro for me. I identify as a white woman. I identify as a person with a disability. I'm blind. And a little visual description, if that's helpful. I, again, identify as a white woman. I have shoulder length, dark blonde hair, and I have a photo on the first slide. Well, the intro slide where I'm wearing a black and white floral dress with a black sweater. So that is a very brief overview of me. I am an access consultant at the McBurney Disability Resource Center. And not only do I have a disability, but I work in the disability field. So it's very prevalent in all that I do, but I'm very passionate about it. So I'm super excited that everyone's here today. I just wanted to do a couple additional welcome items and kind of agenda items. Live transcript is enabled. Feel free to use that as a resource. It's fairly good, and I try to speak slowly and clearly so that it captures the content accurately. I do want to invite you all to please take care of yourself. This is a space, I realize it's over the noon hour. Eat your lunch. Don't feel obligated to have cameras on. This is just an opportunity for you all to gather information. There is going to be some sensitive content. It's not easy to talk about certain things related to oppression and discrimination. It's certainly not easy to hear, and everyone has their different level of impact, so it might impact you in a different way. So again, take care of yourself. I will leave time for questions at the end. If you need a little place marker and want to use the chat as sort of a, hey, here's my thought, my idea, and you can drop it in the chat. I will try to peek in the chat occasionally, but I might get in my kind of in my mode. So if I miss something in the moment, we will get back to it at time for questions. You will have access to these materials, both the PowerPoint as well as a PDF format. Use them. And then as Tim pointed out, there will also be a recording available. So I think that covers a lot of the business. We can move to the next slide, where I just wanted to kind of start with a punch. Isms, ISM. Isms. Have you ever heard of racism, maybe sexism, heterosexism, ageism, classism, even sizeism? Some of you may have heard of these isms. What they are discriminatory either behaviors or language towards a group of people. I have an image on the screen indicating no hate speech. So often isms are fraught with hateful language and actions. But what about ableism? Some may have heard of it, some may not. I actually was having a conversation with a close, my sister-in-law, who I consider a dear friend, and I was sharing about some of the work I'd been doing and said I'm presenting on ableism. And she said, well, what's ableism? And my head spun. I thought, wait a minute, I live and work in this world, but not everybody does. So we may not have heard of it, and that's why we're here today. Let's talk about it. So we'll move to the next slide, and I'll try to help define what is ableism. In this definition I have on the screen, it is the act of prejudice or discrimination against people with disabilities, and or the devaluation of disability. Okay, so that's one definition, a little bit academic. I'd like to move to the next slide and share a different definition. This is a working definition. And what that means is the author, T.L. Lewis, maintains a blog, and they kind of add to this or work on this definition generally annually. It's full of really great information, but I'm going to read this out. This definition to me packs a really big punch. It's on the screen and I will read it audibly. Ableism, a system of assigning value to people's bodies and minds based on societally constructed ideas of normalcy, productivity, desirability, intelligence, excellence, and fitness. These constructed ideas are deeply rooted in eugenics, anti-Blackness, misogyny, colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism. This systemic oppression that leads to people in society determining people's value based on their culture, age, language, appearance, religion, birth or living place, health or wellness, and or their ability to satisfactorily produce, excel, and behave. And lastly, you do not have to be disabled to experience ableism. I use that definition intentionally. As I mentioned, it feels very powerful to me. It's obviously very wordy, but for me, every word carries so much weight and value. So I wanted to share that definition, much lengthier than the previous, but just to set the stage a little bit more on what is ableism. And this is what T.L. Lewis has observed and believes ableism is. So moving to the next slide, breaking some additional information around ableism. Ableism tends to characterize people as being defined by their disabilities. They're inferior, and it also groups them together. So putting everybody in one lump sum. Ableism may be implicit or explicit, and very likely it's both. It may be unintentional, part of that implicit nature of it, but it also may be intentional, but met with or founded in good intentions. I meant well. Really, many people don't intend on treating disabled folks differently. There's often not an intention behind it. And in many cases, especially with ableism, there's often not even an acknowledgement or an understanding that we are doing this. And that's why we're here today, to learn a bit more. Ableism often results from assumptions, fear, pity, kind of where it comes from can often be linked to those types of ideas. But what it will do is it will impact everyone experiencing the oppression differently. It is also widespread and accepted. It's and truly, the world was not designed for people with disabilities in mind. So it's there, it's everywhere, and we often, we really truly do just accept that that's the way things are. Hopefully not anymore, though. Knowing more about it is going to be really powerful. Because lastly, it is harmful and it's prejudice. Period. End of story. So as we talk about ableism, as we think about it and learn about it today and hopefully going forward, there's obviously a strong component towards disability when we talk about ableism, because it is the oppression of folks with disabilities. So I did want to take just a moment to give a little bit of background on disability to sort of set the stage. So the next slide, we're going to just briefly talk about what disability really is. And it's a couple, it can be measured or or recognized in several ways. We could be talking about legal disability. The law dictates. These could be laws like the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA for short, as well as some other federal civil rights laws passed anywhere from the Rehab Act in 1973 on up to the amendments of the Americans with Disabilities Act in 2008. But so legal definitions do exist around what disability is. There's also social constructs or models that we often live very deeply entrenched in understanding and knowing what disability is, and I'm going to talk a little bit about those. It's how we frame or structure the idea of disabilities. It also might be defined by the person who lives it, the identity of the person. That's another very valid point as to what is disability. Well, it's what the person experiences and believes for themselves. It is an aspect of diversity that deserves recognition with social justice efforts. So I often find disability is not commonly talked about through other like diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, or DEI efforts. This has always interests me, but again, I'm very biased on living and working in disability. But the thing about disability is it's really the largest group worldwide of marginalized people. Reportedly, there's around, upwards of 26% of adults have a disability. And according to the US Census Bureau too, as an aside, 1 in 5 Americans may have or likely have a disability, according to the census. It really crosses all age, race, gender identity, and still is not talked about. Many disabilities are actually not observable, or in other words, apparent. So this could be why. Is it out of sight, out of mind? That could be one reason. I suspect it also has a lot to do with the way our society is designed, and some of the information I'll get into in a little bit on kind of where ableism shows up and why we think and feel and talk this way. But the fact that if we're talking about a legal definition of disability under the Americans with Disabilities Act, any physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity is a disability. So absolutely chronic health conditions, mental health conditions, depending on the environment and how inaccessible it is, can absolutely 100% be a disability, as are some of the more apparent or observable major life activity impairments in walking or seeing, hearing, also constitute disability. So again, that's the legal model, but just from one recognition of what disability is, again, out of sight, out of mind, maybe, I don't know. The impacts are still there, even if they can't be seen or observed. And disability also may impact anyone at any stage of life. So to me, it's a unifier. It is something that we absolutely all may experience today, tomorrow, in a year, at any point in our lifespan. Disability is certainly a possible experience for everyone. So that's why I scratched my head a little on why don't we include it more? Why don't we talk about it more? Again, I'll talk a little bit more on maybe otherwise that we don't, but bringing it to the metaphorical social justice table is always going to be a campaign of mine, and I hope you all consider that as well. So in the next slide, 2 slides, so we'll go to the next one. I do want to overview a little bit about those frameworks or those models that I mentioned earlier on kind of understanding or structuring our understanding of disability. And so the 2 models I'll speak about are the medical and the social models. And I'm going to compare no, I'm not going to compare. I'm going to contrast the 2 because they're vastly different. So the medical model. I'll preface by saying both of these models are very prevalent, and depending on the environment you're in, one may be more prevalent than the other, but they're all interwoven. And my bias is that we always work more towards the social model, but I also recognize that even in my work in the disability field, a lot of my work is still structured through the medical model. So with that being said, the medical model indicates that a disability is like a medical, or is the condition of being unable to perform a task. It's very deficiency focused, there's an individual burden, right? The person is the problem. And the individual should also be the agency of change. They need to change or adjust to make things possible, if possible. In contrast, the social model indicates that disability is really the restriction of an activity based upon the design of an environment. The environment is the disabler. The environment is what excludes people from engaging in society. The environment is the problem, and therefore it should be the agent of change. Society should change. Society should adjust. The environment should change. We need to input accessibility features. Things should be designed with accessibility in mind to make a space or anything accessible. Individual differences are normal and accepted. They are not othered. They are, just a part of diversity. So those are the contrasts of the two models, medical and social, and I'm absolutely biased. So my presentation will lean more heavily towards the social model. I hope we work towards that to help minimize some ableism. But the next slide talks about or shares information about the impacts from these models. So the medical model really requires eligibility. It requires someone to go through a process. They are often then separated. There are retrofitted or reactive responses to a person's needs. So, providing a reactive accommodation or the person needing to make a change to be able to access something. Oftentimes that results in segregated or paralleled services, reducing that integration, where in contrast that social model moves towards the integration of all individuals. And really, just as an aside, I think ableism is rooted in the ideas that disabled folks are broken and need to be fixed, which is by and large that medical focus. And my disclaimer is I am not bashing healthcare fields, medical professionals by any means. I'm grateful for the advancements in medical technology and the existence of good healthcare. It's critical and invaluable. And it also is founded really in this idea of if you're broken, you need to be fixed. So in that regard, it does not allow for someone to celebrate or exist in the world feeling good about something that makes them different, whether it's an illness or a physical, a disability impairment of any kind. So it really prevents the celebration of that. The two exist together. The medical model does meet the minimum legal requirement on being able to support people with disabilities. So pulling in that legal aspect again. But in contrast, the social model is really going to be more or less the best practice. So what what do we have to do in the medical model versus what should we do, more the lens through the social model. And with that medical model, folks have to ask to be included, whereas they're not included innately, which would be represented through that social model. Everyone's going to be included, and those inclusive strategies are going to bring people in. So I just wanted to share some of those lenses onto why do we think the way we do? Well, a lot of it has to do with this is what we are living with, a heavily medical model based society with sort of speckles of social model and where we're trying to move towards the social model. But in thinking about ableism, at its heart, it is oppression, and all oppression is founded in privilege. So I wanted to move to the next slide and just give a little basic information around privilege, and the privilege related with ableism is ability-based privilege. If we were speaking about racism, it would be, based on observable, race-based privilege. You're very commonly the dominant race of being white. So in ability-based privilege, it is by definition a set of unearned privileges held by people without disabilities. Really looking at an able-bodied person is superior, and leaning into that, the inferior nature of someone with disability, that they are the other. So in the next slide, I just wanted to ask the question, and if we had kind of a bigger workshop, I always love to kind of do some breakouts and let people pair share. I'm not going to ask you all to do that here today. Although, it can be a really nice way to break up where I'm not just talking at you all, but I just put the thought out there and encourage you all to think a little bit in your current experiences. How might privilege show up for you? Where is the privilege in relation to an ability-based privilege? A couple ideas that I wanted to just pull and share that I think about would be something like, let's think of a student. Let's imagine a student. Let's say they're in 6th grade. And that individual gets to go to school on the first day of school and access their textbooks. All the information that is available for them to learn is right there, available to them in print, and they're able to navigate their school, go to all their classes, and do their learning on that day. That is a privilege. A student with a disability, let's say they have a print-based disorder, and they maybe it's a learning disability in reading, maybe it's a visual impairment. They're likely not going to get access to their reading materials right away. They might have to start a little bit behind. So the ability to just go to school and learn is a privilege. Something else that comes up for me, I think it would be a big privilege to just spontaneously go and meet up with a friend for a coffee or for lunch. Hey, let's go meet up. Let's have a chat about that ableism presentation we all went to, because that's what we want to do in our free time. But let's say that's something you would like to do, and that's something you can do. What if you need to see, is that space even accessible? If I use a wheelchair or a walker, are there steps in? Are the tables so crammed in the coffee shop that I'm not going to be able to get through them? Maybe I can't drive. Does the bus take me there? Do I have enough money for the Uber? What about allergies? Is there anything I can eat? Might I have cross-contamination? So calling ahead, the lack of spontaneity is where the impact and the barrier is. So the privilege around spontaneously attending a lunch with a friend is something I think about often with privilege as well. Just a
Leslie,
couple.
we
Yes.
do have a question in the chat that
Oh,
has to do
great.
with privilege.
I don't
So
even
I'm
have that
wondering
up. I apologize. Thank you,
oh,
Tim.
no,
Go
no,
for it.
this is why I am here, Leslie. I have to do something to earn my keep. So what would be considered earned privilege? I don't know if you need a
What would
further
be
definition for
considered?
the person or.
Well, probably in relation to it's an unearned privilege. So
Uh,
there so able body privilege is unearned. It's something you're born with. It's not something you work towards. It is something that you are just given. So the absence of an impairment in vision. Okay, so I'll use myself as an example. I was not born with the baseline, what we consider privilege as ability-based privilege, because I'm not able to see the way that quote unquote the norm is. So as someone who can perhaps see or see with corrective lenses has an unearned privilege. They didn't do anything to get that right. They just existed. So when we talk about oppression and privilege and those power differentials, unearned privilege means you didn't work towards anything. You didn't change the color of your skin to look like the norm, kind of something you're working towards. The norm being white, if we're talking about racism and the privilege, white privilege that goes along with that. I don't feel like I quite accurately answered the question because I didn't offer what an earned privilege would be outside of doing something to make a change to get you to that level of not experiencing the oppression that someone that doesn't have that privilege would experience. Another kind of word for that would be passing. Like I might pass as being sighted in this realm, for instance. So other people, that might be somewhat of an earned privilege because I'm not exhibiting some of the barriers or what visually might look like if you saw me out on the street using my white cane. um, that's something, that then places me into a space where now you've decided that I have a disability because I'm identifying that through my white cane. It gets a little bit complicated, and I don't think I did a great job answering your question. I apologize. That's what I have to offer.
Thank you.
Yeah. And now I'm pulling the chat up so that I hopefully will hear those pop through using my technology, my screen reader. Okay. So moving, if we're okay then to move kind of past that conceptualization of privilege so that y'all can keep thinking a little bit about privilege. I did want to talk a little bit about kind of historical experiences. We're talking about the current situation, and I'm going to bop on back to that and what we can do going forward as we wrap up. But I do think there's a really important place in this information, in this presentation, around understanding historical experiences, not fully where our ableism comes from, but how it also manifested, in the past, and maybe ways that it still does. So this particular slide, the historical experiences slide, is a very troubling one for me. All this information is troubling, but I also just want to give a little bit of a content warning and a trigger warning that this as well as other information might be upsetting or difficult. So please, again, take care of yourself. But the history in the past for people with disabilities is very troubling. Very commonly, individuals needed or were separated, they were segregated. Perhaps they were required to be in sheltered workshops. They were institutionalized, put away in asylums, and were forced to be separate from others, their loved ones, and society at large. They might even, maybe have been segregated to special schools, or perhaps even special. And if I could kind of air quote special, because that word is one that I think is worth a little bit of exploration. But separate or special classrooms too. That segregation, not parallel services, historically and maybe even sometimes currently. People also might have only had the option to perform in what were called freak shows. And on this slide, I have an image of the movie poster of The Greatest Showman. And that's a film about P.T. Barnum's original circus, which was a freak show. Meaning that people that looked different or that were different often didn't have another place to go to have belonging or community. So there's a couple images of the cast of characters, a man of very large stature, a little person or a person with dwarfism. There were just characters that were very different, and worked together, performing and entertaining others. People were experimented on and exterminated. I think about this in times of Nazi Germany. People with disabilities were a part of the genocide, mass genocide, as well as experimentation. And there's a long history of medical experimentation on individuals with disabilities in institutional settings. Eugenics, I know this is a topic that you also have an opportunity to learn more about. So I won't go into that, but in the early 1900s, that movement to really eliminate the quote unquote drain on society, the defects. People were sterilized in an effort to interrupt the genetic line of a defect. Again, language, I'm thoughtful about language, but trying to be as clear as possible. So ultimately, historically, individuals with disabilities had no autonomy. Others decided what would happen to and for them, and were had very few rights and ability and opportunity to have experiences. So with that heavy historical view, let's move forward, which is sometimes the only thing we can do, and to learn a little bit about, where does ableism show up in where we're at today. there are a couple different areas that I wanted to just briefly highlight around kind of the more overt or not so much obvious, but sort of interwoven experiences of ableism. Where do we see it? Honestly, it's everywhere. But breaking this down, it could be in an institutional setting. So what that would look like is limiting access for people with disabilities. Maybe that's materials. Maybe that's websites are not designed accessibly, so people just cannot access them from the start. Institutional ableism might also have an experience of no one in power has a disability, or at the very least, no one is even included in the decision making. Individuals with disabilities aren't even included in the decision making. Maybe the policies, very likely the policies exclude access, don't include accessibility in mind. Who were they written for? Who were they written by, these policies that usually drive the work that we do? So just as a brief aside, I have indicated both academic as well as medical under the institutional setting, kind of umbrella. And these are two areas that require a lot more conversation and likely even their own, presentations and workshops just to talk about them separately, academic ableism and medical ableism, but falling under that institutional umbrella. Interpersonal ableism is also very prevalent. That could be something as likely obvious as name calling and bullying. Maybe also some avoidance, which is sometimes a little less obvious, but definitely still as challenging. So, you're avoiding the person with a disability, maybe because you don't know how to be around them. Exclusionary, you're excluding them from events, whether that's by not inviting the person at all or selecting an event or a place that is going to be inaccessible to people. As well as internalized ableism. And this is one that, given how ableism is so prevalent and a lot of the things we think and do, people turning ableism in on themselves. It's very self-directed, thinking about yourself. I'm being dramatic. I should work harder. I should just do better. I'm taking resources from someone who really needs them. These are the types of statements someone might make towards themselves, knowing that they have a disability, but thinking that they just should be better, work harder, or not have these experiences. And then I'm going to go into more detail about these more covert spaces that ableism shows up. So for instance, language. I mean, we know language is powerful, right? Language is a part of our culture. But when you see disability as only negative in your language, why would you even imagine that someone would want to even identify as having a disability? If our language doesn't support it, then of course that makes sense that we wouldn't want to even talk about it or feel okay about disability. So it's about that negative perspective that many of us have because of how our world is. And we'll talk a little more about that. Microaggressions are also more covert ways that ableism shows up. They can be verbal, they can be visual, and oftentimes are influenced strongly through social media. And we're going to move a little bit more into what that looks like and talk a lot more about that here now. Okay. So in the next slide, ableist culture. I've been talking a lot about the fact that ableism is everywhere, and that's because it's interwoven in our culture. And on the screen, I have two what are called memes. The first is an individual that I perceive as male in formal attire, holding the hand of an individual I perceive as a female using a power wheelchair. And the quote says, he asked her to prom even in her condition. Like and share equals respect. So an image, a visualization that someone that presents as able-bodied, standing on two legs. So we're going to make the assumption that the recognition of even in her condition, is related to the fact that she is a wheelchair user. So that's one image. And then the other is of someone I perceive as female in kind of small running clothes. And in running position with prosthetic legs. And the quote is, "So what's your excuse again?" And these images are often called inspiration porn. They don't support disabled folks. Really, what they do is reinforce negative stereotypes. So it's more or less these visualizations of microaggressions. It's making the person, the able-bodied, the privileged person, feel better about themselves. Well, at least it's not that bad. I'm not that bad, right? So really reinforces those negative stereotypes around the tragedy of disability or the inspiration of it. They really feed into our ableist culture. So that's why I wanted to use these as that kind of ableist culture slide. But moving ahead, another big part of culture is language, right? Any culture is often made up of a language, rich with language. So on the slide that we have ahead or here, I have some phrases, some words and some phrases that I wanted to just give a little bit of overview on. The first, well, the thing about language is these, and even these words are often, or very likely prevalent in all of our language. And I'm absolutely in the same boat as everyone else because we all are born out of the same culture. Even if we don't share all elements of culture, we're exposed to these things. So I want to preface by saying any of these words that jump out on the screen or as I read them off, if you've used them, you're within the norm. And I'm here to tell you that let's try to do a little better and understand a little more about what these words mean and the effect that they have on people. So these are just a handful of examples. The first row is, I would consider these to be more or less euphemisms. These are ways to not say disability. The first is disabled, but the A in disabled is capitalized, so really emphasizing the abled piece of it. Physically challenged, differently abled, handicapped, special needs. The thing about these words, about euphemisms, are there ways to avoid saying a word. They're ways to prevent celebrating the word disability. If disability, if you're not saying something, then it's probably a bad word. It's probably something that we shouldn't be saying. And that's the message often that we are conveying to others, and often the message that is experienced by the person with a disability. So if it's so bad you can't say the word, then I should probably not be okay with having a disability. It's a dance. It's a dance around a word. We don't say bad words, so say something else. So that's really that message. Like, where is this coming from? In most cases, if you remember, ableism is likely not intentional, or it's met with good intentions. And that's probably where this language falls into play. We don't mean harm, but we may be doing harm. So that's why we're here to kind of learn about that and just think about how to do better. And there are absolutely restrictions on ways that we might have to use some of this language still. But I just want to plant the seed in helping people think a little deeper about it. The second row and kind of the rest of them have more or less, are kind of outdated, but we use these words very commonly even in our language today. They have historical origins in disability, and what they are is they're always used in a negative way. They're used to marginalize people. So deaf and dumb, a long time ago, I don't know when, someone who was deaf was considered deaf and dumb, meaning dumb, they couldn't speak. But we now indicate, oh, you're what are you, deaf and dumb? Did you not hear me? It's always a negative. Did you not understand? Lame, it has to do with physical or mobility disability, walking differently or not being able to walk. That's not how it's used. It's commonly used in phrases like you're insulting someone that they're so lame. And a straight up slur would be the word retarded, commonly thrown around in language as a slur. Phrases like wheelchair bound. Wheelchairs are adaptive aids. I mean, I'm certainly not going to generalize all, but most people who use a wheelchair find them to be an aid to navigate and to be independent. They're not bound to it. And then a lot of phrases around mental health that we commonly use: insane, psycho, crazy. Oh, that party was so crazy, or I feel so crazy today. And it's never a positive thing. So just some things to be aware of: turn a blind eye, use your voice. These are also phrases that are specific to doing something using a sensory, a sense that someone may or may not have. So what are you really trying to say when you say use your voice? Do you want someone to share their opinion or what? So just some food for thought around language. And then moving ahead into microaggressions, I'm going to spend most time, although not a whole lot, on this first one, but there are 2 microaggression slides. And I intentionally put the second one second so that you could, if interested, go back and do your own research, because it's a little more academic. But what microaggressions are phrases or comments, or as I previously shared, they could even be more or less a visual representation that may be well-intentioned. Usually they are, but they often leave the individual uncertain how to respond and feeling like, maybe I just got a backhanded compliment, but I don't really know what to do with that. Oftentimes microaggressions are considered to be death by 1,000 cuts. So those cumulative phrases and statements that add up towards harm. Some common themes I wanted to point out on this slide around microaggressions. And again, like language, you may have absolutely done this. Likely you have. I know I have. And so that's why I wanted to just bring light to it, that it might affect a person that you're speaking with. The first theme would be a perceived helplessness or pity. Telling someone with a disability, I can't imagine how hard things are for you. Really emphasizing how difficult something might be. You perceive their experience as difficult. Maybe they've shared with you things are tough. Okay, but if they haven't, making that assumption just because they have that disability really reinforces that negative stereotype. Infantilizing, treating a person with a disability as younger or less than, or even less intelligent. Commonly, folks with disabilities get called honey or sweetie. Here, honey, here, baby. So could be an adult, could be someone older than you. Even if it is a child, not treating them with the same respect you would another individual. So inspiration, again, those images are, as I mentioned, considered to often called inspiration porn. You're so inspiring. You're so amazing to me. This is often done, again, very good intentions. I want to compliment the person that they're doing great things. We'll compliment the person on really doing great things, not on doing something that is a daily task, something that is likely, something you wouldn't think is amazing if someone else had done it. But because they have a disability, you can't possibly imagine them being able to do it. So yeah, I call it the amazing hat when someone compliments me and says how amazing it is that you did fill in the blank. Well, I don't know, it's not that amazing. Yeah, I mean, I had to do it differently. And the world's not designed to help me with that. But I want to really do something amazing, not just walk out my front door. And that's considered admirable. Charity, someone wanting to help, let me help you. I'm going to do this for you. Another very common one would be spiritual intervention or prayer. Strangers walking up to an individual and asking if they can pray for them or offering to pray for them. As well as comparison. An example of this might be, you finding out that someone has migraines and letting them know, oh, I had a headache yesterday and it really kind of took me out for a little bit, so I know just what it's like. Or even offering health or medical advice. Those can be, this worked for me, it'll probably work for you in your chronic illness. Denial of disability experience and doubt. You don't look disabled, especially with the prevalence of non-apparent or less observable disabilities, chronic health, mental health disabilities. Someone needing to prove that they really are disabled. If they don't fit the narrative of what disability should look like, now are you asking them to disclose their private medical information? Is it a compliment? They're just fraught with confusion and uncertainty, and what was really What were you trying to get at by telling someone that they don't look disabled, or maybe even that, oh, you're disabled, but you're so attractive. That's actually a very common phrase as well. So, these are just phrases and things that that people, folks with disabilities experience regularly. And again, just that cumulative negative stereotype reinforcing situation. So the next slide, we're actually going to breeze over. I'm going to let it be available to you all in your resources. It's just more academic themes of microaggressions. And so for the interest of time, I wanted to get moving towards kind of more wrapping up here. Okay. So with that being said, we are going to move to, let's see here. Okay, so we're going to move to accessible language. So kind of shift the lens a little bit. Like, Leslie, you've been telling us for like 40 minutes about all of this really hard stuff and what we probably are doing and how negative this can be. And it's heavy and it's not fun. But I do also want to give some guidance other than just observing, what we have been doing and why we might be doing it around ableism, to what we could be doing to do better. So in regards to language, if there's a lot of ableist language in our culture, how can we do better? What is accessible language? And this is a question I often get, just tell me what I should do. Well, I'm not going to tell you exactly what you should do, but I do want to give you some options. There are a couple different types of language when we're talking about disability. So there is person-first language and identity-first language are kind of the two most popular. A person-first language is you put the person first. It's a person with a disability, a student with a learning disability. And this is that student, or that disability is one part of a person, but it doesn't make up all of the person. This is a type of language that was developed during the civil rights movement. So individuals who are a little bit, more mature in their age, that were, the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990. So we're not even talking about elderly folks, but civil rights era, pre 1990, person first language started to move in that direction. A lot of more contemporary folks in the disability realm, people with disabilities now, shift a little bit more towards, there's a cultural shift towards identity first language. The thought is, you should know I'm a person. I shouldn't have to tell you I'm a person first. So there's a little bit of that. But even with that cultural shift, I always say, if you don't know, start with person first. What identity first language is taking that the person you're working with actually has identified with their disability. Not everyone does. Not everyone is in a place of feeling and acceptance towards their disability. I introduced myself and said that I'm a blind person. I do. I identify as being blind. It's a huge part of who I am. It really does affect most decisions and most experiences in my life, and I celebrate it, but I haven't always. So kind of that spectrum of identity, as any human goes through, that might very well, it likely does play a role with with disability too. Identity first language does tend to celebrate and really reinforce that disability is not a bad word. But there are some sections of individuals. I think of neurodivergence. Some people really identify with being neurodivergent and don't identify as I am autistic. They might say I'm neurodivergent. So everyone has a right to their own identity language, what they feel comfortable and safe with. So even though I said I'm not telling you what you should do, your options are probably safer to start with person first language until you know more about the person you're engaging with. Kind of a good place to start, but then be very aware to go where the person leads you as they tell a little bit more about themselves. Okay. I even intermix the language in this presentation. Some may have picked up on that, others maybe not, but saying both, people or folks with disabilities as well as disabled people. So I try to model that. We can use them all. So in moving to the next slide, It's a little bit of a punch of a slide. How can I be less ableist? Is that maybe what we're all here for today? I don't know. I strive every day to do this. So little thought bubble. How can I be less ableist? I'm here to tell you that systemically you are programmed this way. All right. So maybe that gives you some permission to not feel so badly if any of this is triggering, like, ooh, I can't believe I did that, or maybe I should be different or do differently. But the past is in the past and we can always do better. So hopefully a little bit of this stuck and allows you to think more broadly about some of our behaviors. This last slide that we're going to move to are just some ideas and suggestions on how to kind of frame ourselves into trying to be less ableist. There's an image of a multi-diverse, kind of multi-generational group of individuals, both able-bodied and disabled folks, kind of walking away in a field or a meadow. And so I have some ideas here. How to be less ableist: educate yourself. Starting today, you came here today. Let's talk about it. Let's keep talking about it. Talk about it with your family, with your kids. Included in all areas of diversity, what makes people different and valuable. Check yourself. Again, you came today. You saw some slides on some language, some microaggressions, got some ideas. Am I using those? Did I do that? Did I use the accessible restroom when I really didn't need it? Ooh, I actually know that I did that. Did I say that my travel last week was crazy? Okay, I think I did. I think I'm going to not do that. That's not what I meant. I'm going to do better. Apologize, say you will do better if you learn you've done harm to someone. That's all comes into play when we check ourselves. Observe, however that means for you. Listen, look, feel, whatever you can do to observe. Notice access points around you. Are things accessible? Are they not? And just be thoughtful about the people that you might be engaging with, or that might be using that space, or engaging in whatever you're doing with them. I also like to say, in observing, notice your media too. How is disability represented in the show you're watching? Is that a disabled actor? Odds are probably not, although I'm really thrilled and celebrating the movie Coda and lots of recognition that it got using a deaf actor talking about deaf ideas and experiences in a good and normal way. So what is the message of it conveyed? What are we observing? Get involved is another way that we can be less ableist, whether that's contributing with donations or ideas, anything towards disability rights movements. And then ask, listen, and respect. Ask before assuming, listen to the person and respect their response. If you see me on the street corner about to cross the street, ask if I need assistance. If I say no, thank you, because I need to listen to my traffic and I'm really paying attention to that so I can travel safely, please respect my answer. And that goes the same to anyone. If you ask them if they need assistance or how they like to be identified, please respect their answer. It's very empowering to have a say in who you are and how you're represented. Include, that's the very last one. That's what we'll leave with. And just be inclusive, include others, make decisions with people with disabilities, let them have autonomy. I'm biased, but I want to really promote that bias that, disabled folks are actually really incredible problem solvers. I'm going to generalize because we are living in a world that isn't designed for us. So having to come up with alternatives and adaptations, and I want those kinds of people at the table making decisions. So just encouraging you all to include others. Okay. That is my hefty commentary and information. As a point of resource, there are some slides at the end I intentionally didn't want to get to. It just gives some more suggestions if you're ever holding events, how to be more accessible or inclusive, even around engagement. So check those materials out as they come out to you. And at this point, I know we don't have much time at all, but a tiny bit of time for questions. So I welcome and encourage them.
I just want to thank you so much, Leslie. This is Tim. And I even paid more attention this time, but I can't wait to follow up with some things. One of the things that really struck me is, that even though, I could identify as a person with a disability, and like you were saying, you do too, that some of the language is just inherent in the system, it seems. It's like, well, how many times have I said something flippant, thinking that it was a joke and not thinking about the consequences of it? And it's not because I'm mean. It's not because I'm arrogant. It's not because I dislike people, but I'm not aware.
Absolutely.
I'm not aware of the people around me. So I really like that. And I thank you for that.
Thanks for your
do you have
vulnerability, Tim. I'm in the same boat. I did it in a meeting the other day, and I realized it later, and we can all do better. You being here and you acknowledging that, all of you all, that's all we can do.
We do have a question in the chat. If you have any tips for how to deal with incidents of ableism, especially when it's coming from someone who has authority or a position over you.
So as the recipient, I mean, because it gets tricky when you are the one who experienced the oppression, the discrimination, that whatever, that however it feels for you, it is so much harder to, we often say, even for something like a microaggression, the victim of that should not be the one to fix it, but oftentimes we are. So if you're speaking as a person who was oppressed, who, ableism was done unto you, my first point of action is to process through it in a safe space. So whether that's, a colleague or a therapist or a family member, to talk about it and process through it, because power is privilege. And so not only is it able-bodied privilege likely in this circumstance, but it's also the power of being an authority. That's heavy. So processing it first, taking care of yourself first as you've experienced that, and then working with, if you can identify some safe people to help you navigate that, whether if it was in a workplace setting, a supervisor that didn't harm you, working with them, or going to HR or administration if it's in a school setting. So trying to not have to navigate that by yourself, because that can be really difficult. Some people get very well versed in navigating that, but it takes practice, and it takes a lot of energy. So yeah, just taking care of yourself, processing with others that you feel safe with, and then asking for help in trying to educate and inform how that harm was done unto you, and ways that they can potentially be better.
We also have a comment. If you could just go back briefly to when you were talking about use your voice.
Yeah.
And we hear that a lot in the context of empowerment. Stand up, which is another phrase.
Exactly.
Stand up, use your voice.
Raise your hand.
Raise your hand. Is it ever okay to say that? Is it contextual? Is it?
Yeah.
Language is hard.
It is hard, and I want to be fully transparent. I named this presentation, "Let's Talk About Ableism," or "Let's Talk Ableism," and I messaged the director of the McBurney Center, and I said, I don't know if this is okay. What is talk ableist? So I'm with you all. We're all learning. In regards to use your voice, that's a little more specific in that I tend to recommend, what are we really trying to say? So if you're questioning something like, okay, I want to say use your voice. Well, is there a different way to say that? What do you really want people to do when you want them to use your voice? Do you want them to have an opinion, to share out, to, it can feel clunky, because use your voice can be even like an empowering, almost protest, and it's valuable. But for someone that doesn't have a voice, they can still share their opinion, in a way that is just as valuable. And so that's sort of where I circle back to let's talk about ableism. Talking can be done in a lot of ways. Used through American Sign Language, done through, talking doesn't have to be voice related. So, but I was really conflicted on that too. And this is not designed to tell everybody like, oh my gosh, triple check and be completely, PC or politically correct about everything. It's really meant to just think some of these things really do have historical things and should probably be avoided. Use your voice. I do encourage you to try not to use it as much, but if you do, maybe just give a disclaimer and acknowledge, our campaign says use your voice. I want to acknowledge that that might not be the most accessible thing. Just so that you acknowledge that that might exclude a big group of people that don't feel connected now to whatever you're trying to do because of how you said it.
I also want to bring out one of the statements in the chat about, this is, I love the awareness. I love the history of it. But some of this is also, as you were saying at the beginning, is to bring ableism into the question of disparity, into the topics of equity, into the topics of discrimination, and start to recognize it for what it is in the larger society. And I think you did a great job in putting us that societal model versus the medical model. Just is always something that leaves me thinking, because as long as we're stuck in this view of something is broken, and that we need to fix it instead of celebrating what it is and who they are. It's just so hard.
Yeah, it is. It's so hard. It's so hard. It's not easy. It's not fun. And it still is. We talk about it. That's why we're doing this, right? That's why we're here. We're talking about it, and we can sit in this discomfort because that's the only way we're going to grow. And let's just keep talking about it. Bring disability to the table, and you'll find it brings a lot more people ideas to the table as well.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
I
and
know
then
we're
this quick comment about using your
ahead.
words to your 2-year-old. I said that to my 2-year-old this morning. Same thought. But his words, actually, he uses some sign and isn't in a place to, words are okay, right? We're all using words. Words can be print, they can be verbal, they can be signed. So yeah, express your feelings. That's another good one. But yes, I hear you. That just popped up and I thought, ooh, I know, 2 is hard. Good gracious, 2 is hard.
Yes.
So
I have two 20-year-olds, and in some ways 20s are hard too.
That's hard too. Yeah.
But that's okay. I want to so Christine put in, I want to suggest express yourself as a tagline, but apologize if the Gen Xer for the earworm, because yes, that song is now in my head and I'm not even a Gen Xer. Thank you so much for that, Christine. I will be thinking about that for the rest of the afternoon.
Yeah.
I want to thank you all so much for being here. I do want to let you know that we are in discussion about possibly doing some more webinars on ableism, and the best way to find out about those is to be part of the resource roundup out of Southern Regional Center. Is then you'll be able to get the latest and the greatest information, as well as the information on the eugenics webinar coming up on Thursday. So if you accidentally signed up in registration and said you wanted to opt out of information from Southern Regional Center, if you change your mind, give me an email, drop it in the chat, and I will opt you back in, at least through when we're done with ableism and eugenics, which who knows when that'll be, because there's a lot to uncover and there's a lot to talk about. So thank you so much, Leslie. I appreciate it. I appreciate your time. Thank you all for being here. Have a great afternoon.